Welcome to the Living Room Literary Online Series number 10, which was presented August 30th, 2020. The series is produced and hosted by M.L. Liebler, internationally recognized Michigan poet, editor, publisher, literary activist, university professor, and performance artist. This episode features the work of Semaj Brown, Keith Taylor, and Lisa Lenzo. And now, here is M.L. Liebler.
Well, welcome everybody to the 10th reading in the series, the Living Rooms series, online literary series. And eventually, once everybody gets in, I'll try to figure out how to turn the doorbell off so you don't hear it throughout. We have a really great reading today, and we're going to feature Keith Taylor coming to us from Isle Royale. We could say that anyway. No, coming from Ann Arbor, Isle Ann Arbor. We have Semaj Brown coming live from Flint, and we have Lisa Lenzo somewhere in western Michigan, I believe. The readings are sponsored, as always, by the Detroit Writers Guild, Poets and Writers, and BookBeat Bookstore, where you can get books by all of these authors, or you can at least order them from them if they're not on the shelf. And that information will make available shortly. You can just go to their website for that. Okay, so we're going to go with, we're going to start with Keith Taylor. And let me say a few words about Keith here. As the reasoning behind people being in the Zoom room is so that if, the readers can get some reaction, whereas on Facebook, as you know, that doesn't happen. And it can't happen, actually. So we have some people in the room. I don't know how many at this point. Well, yeah, 17. But actually on Facebook, we're going to have hundreds of people watching this. I think the last one, we were close to 500 people plus on Facebook. And that's why it's on Facebook. It's a little more easy to access than the Zoom room. Okay. Starting with Keith Taylor. Keith Taylor has authored and edited 17 books and chapbooks. His most recent is Ecstatic Destinations on Alice Green and Company, 2018. His last full-length collection, The Bird While from Wayne State University Press, the Made in Michigan series, 2017. Won the bronze medal from the Forward Indies Poetry Book of the Year, which is a great award. His poems, stories, reviews, essays, translations have appeared in North America and in Europe. He's recently retired from the University of Michigan, where he taught creative writing for 20 years and was the University of Michigan's person behind Bear River, I believe. So could we, if we can unmute Keith, and I could like to introduce him, please welcome Keith Taylor.
Okay, good. It's good to know that I'm going first, because I thought I would pick a few poems that start a little gloomy and then get a little better at the end, and then we'll be followed by people who will pick our mood up, I'm sure. But I did want to start by thanking ML. I think within the last 10 or 15 readings that I gave before the lockdown, I'm fine now. Yeah. My wife's making sure she can hear me. ML set that one up at the Third Man Records in Midtown, and now this is within the first 5 or 10 readings I've done after the lockdown, and ML has again set it up. So it's he is important to us. We appreciate it. So anyway, I thought I'd start by reading a few poems that I have written during the our isolation, my isolation anyway, and they're all a little bit ominous. They touch on being alone and looking out at the world and having parts of the world come in and bother us. The first one I want to read just because it's a reminder that when we started all of this, here in Michigan anyway, we still had snow on the ground. And I'm looking out of my window at my backyard and the tracks in the snow. The poem is called When the Beast Passes Through. Woke to snowlight in our last significant snow on a quiet day in a time of quiet days, and tracks in the snow up from the avenue, fresh tracks, very fresh, caned tracks, but no dog walks like this in a straight line, 1 foot directly before the last, up and out toward our neighbors. The book that we celebrated in Detroit was about the music, mostly popular music from Detroit. And so I thought I might read this one. It has a popular song in it, although the song was popular in 1770 when it was written. What's interesting to me, though, is that I bet everyone on this, at this moment, knows this song. Oh dear, what can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be? Johnny's too long at the fair. He promised to buy me a bunch of blue ribbon. He promised to buy me a bunch of blue ribbon. He promised to buy me a bunch of blue ribbon to tie up my bonny brown hair. 1770, good chance it came to this country carried by soldiers in bright red coats who came to fight against people who didn't want to pay their taxes. Johnny's too long at the fair. Oh dear, what can the matter be? I haven't been outside in months. From the window, I watch chipmunks pulling up dirt from the holes they dug through the yard. At night, I see the shadows of foxes and coyotes slink into the back lot. Raccoons growl and howl outside my door. Oh dear, what can the matter be? I haven't seen any cars on the street for days, just thin young people running, wearing bright, tight clothes, hats pulled down to their eyebrows and masks up past their noses. Oh dear, what can the matter be? My neighbor left a note on the door saying people are marching on Main Street, carrying signs and dancing across the yellow lines. I keep watching my window, but they haven't come by here yet. Oh dear, what can the matter be? And here's an apocalyptic poem, although it's an apocalypse that hasn't happened. The monarch butterflies have not gone extinct. But here's imagining if they had. The last monarch. Suddenly, there was a summer without monarchs. I had seen monarchs clustered in small trees on the north shores of large lakes, waiting for a night breeze to carry them across. So many butterflies on one tree that it bent almost to the ground. And then a summer without monarchs. And I had walked one September beside another lake littered with the broken orange wings of monarchs caught in storms trying to cross. And just the October before, I'd seen one monarch lonely on a baseball field flying south. But still, suddenly, one summer without monarchs. And then the fall. Out of the attic. I don't mind it in the attic. hearing it scurry above me at night or seeing it sneak out of the cracks in the roof when I'm sitting outside, then watching it fly like some crazed and jerky swallow between the oaks. But this one came out of the attic. Now it's flying around my study, dipping behind the books on the top shelves, my box Dickinson, my 2-volume hardcover Williams Collected, making its ugly little sounds like a bald mouse with sharp teeth. I have no idea how to get it back in. The things we do. We've done real work, spent real money to drain the water away from the foundation and keep our basement dry. We send it to the street or run it underground so it can filter down to the aquifer. We haven't stopped for years, decades now. And still I check almost daily for thin streams running across the floor toward my books or into the closet where we keep our winter coats. So those were all pandemic poems. This one's a little happier. In one of our emails, ML said he was missing going to Mass, so I thought I'd read this for him. Infant baptism. When she was 6 weeks old, her mother exhausted, sleeping, and me dumb and clumsy in my fathering, I wrapped her and took her out one late December night in a snowstorm to see a snowy owl perched in a tree like a gigantic, puffy, pure white songbird peering down on us, yellow-eyed, frightened or curious or vaguely wondering if my daughter might be food when I lifted her toward him. See, see. Snow fell on her face and she didn't cry. ML commented that I had been on Isle Royal. I was on Isle Royal last summer, 2019, as a returning artist in residence. The first time I was there was 1991, which you may realize is almost 30 years ago. And I was 30 years younger and stronger, although it didn't become completely clear to me after I'd been on Isle Royal that I missed some of that strength. Here's a poem I wrote from that first time on Isle Royal in 1991. And again, to give another shout out to our host, this was part of a collection of poems called Dream of the Black Wolf that was first published in a chapbook wrapped in corrugated cardboard that was published by ML's Ridgeway Press back in the day. Sold very quickly too, by the way. It was maybe my fastest selling chapbook ever. This was a poem about canoeing in the canoe that the National Park Service. Those of you who don't know, Isle Royal is an island in the northwest corner of Lake Superior. It's the largest island and the largest lake in the world. It's the least visited national park in the lower 48. You have to make an effort to go there. And unless you get the artist in residence appointment, which many people here could get, you have to carry your own stuff and sleep in tents. But luckily I had the appointment. So here is my first complaint about the canoe, canoeing against the wind. I don't have to do this. 2 strokes to move a yard. Then a breath, a breeze, pushed back and sideways against rocks. And my hat blows away. 2 strokes to move a yard. If this canoe were keeled, it wouldn't catch the wind blowing from Superior up the inlet, pushing 2 strokes to move a yard. I'm here because I want to be out in the wind. Those poems are reprinted, by the way, in a Wayne State book in 2009. So last year I was there and I got in and they were very nice to me. And I went to look at the canoe. And after reading this poem, occasionally for 30 years, complaining about the canoe, I looked and it was exactly the same canoe that I've been complaining about in public for a long time. So I think this was the canoe's revenge. Going in. Wind caught my canoe, twirled it, and I went in. Cold pushed my air out. I gasped and splashed toward shore, toward the beautifully indifferent spruce and cedar, the wild iris and tiger lilies blooming late after their rainy spring. These new IRL poems will be in a new book called Let Them Be Left, a new chapbook, which will be published by a chapbook publisher here in Ann Arbor, Alice Green and Company, in the next month or two, I think. And several of you will be getting copies in the mail, particularly ML, but I think there's some other people on this list who will get some too. Well, I wasn't going to read this little 4-line one, but I think I will. I almost didn't include it here because I thought it might be too macho. But now that it's all typeset and getting ready for press, I kind of like it. Bushwhacking. Scratches on both arms and a gouge across my head. I feel better than I've felt in months. IRL is famous for its wolves and its moose. The first chapbook, the wolves played a bigger part in it. It was called Dream of the Black Wolf from 30 years ago. This one, there were a lot of moose on IRL last summer. The wolves had almost died out. They just reintroduced them last year, and the moose have taken over. You saw moose everywhere. There'd be moose on the path between me and my outhouse. My daughter went on a hike when she came and visited. She went on a hike by herself and suddenly looked up and there was a bull moose 20 feet away. She recorded it on her camera and you could hear her voice. Hi, Mr. Moose. I'm really a nice person. So here's moose antlers. Moose antlers glisten like bone, hold the sun, the brightest objects on Scoville Point, nestled in a bowl of basalt and blueberries, bone shed after rituals of mating. 11 tines aside, the first polished and sharpened to stab and dominate. The bone-white palms rivered with lines of veins that once fed the velvet, not a memory of death this time, but bone shed celebrating in bone brightness the spring-born calf, the generations of moose. Moose are famous for, one of the easiest ways to see them is when they find a mineral lick and they're licking up the minerals and the salts that they need for their digestion. And that's also an easy way to see them on IRL. Scientists call that whole process, and animals that do it, geophagia. That's the title of this poem, Geophagia. Moose, head down in hidden lake, then under, bending her back like a freshwater whale, diving, she's gone down, bypassing rushes, straight to the salts. She eats the earth. And here's the end of that little chapbook, and it'll be the last poem I read today. In the cabin they'd given me, there was a lovely little bench on a bluff about 30 feet above Lake Superior that looked out toward the Canadian coastline across hundreds of square miles of the national park, the water. And it was a great place to spend the hours of sunset and on into the night. From the bluff. On warm days, seen from the bluff, down across the bay and the islands, everything's blue with delicate bands of green. Dragonflies swoop in, gulls call, loons float past. I wait for the eagle to dive to water and stretch its talons in to grab a fish, then roost above the nearest island. Here, alone in all this space, I cannot believe our world is dying. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
People clapping even though the mics are turned off. That's good. Excellent, Keith. I don't know if Keith and I are on the top of your Zoom screen, but I'm looking at it and I'm getting confused who's who.
That's right.
And I'm like, I never have been on an isle with wolves. What? Yeah, and you did that last year.
I did.
And you do it like alone, and is there electricity?
Nope. No electricity.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Can you get a phone signal if you
Nope.
need help?
Nope. I couldn't anyway.
Wow.
They give me a two-way radio in case I'm
Oh.
in trouble. So.
Okay. Wow. And here's one last bird question because Keith is a birder. Is it safe to assume the Baltimore Orioles have left Detroit?
This would be right about the time, but you could still see them, I think. I think they'd still be around.
So I should continue to put my orange and
yeah, maybe
jelly.
another couple weeks, yeah.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. Yeah. All right. Yeah, they were heavy here in the spring.
Were they? Great. You're lucky.
Yeah, I had quite a few, got some good pictures of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up is Semaj Brown. Semaj is a well-known poet from Detroit and worked out of Detroit for a number of years. She got married, moved to Flint. She is the first poet laureate of Flint, Michigan, actually. They haven't had one until Semaj moved up there. She's the author of poetry and prose collection, Bleeding Fire, Tap the Eternal Spring of Regenerative Light, which has been described, excuse me, I don't have COVID, as an odyssey in African-American history and culture. She launched the Poetry Pod Project, P3, which is her civic initiative to utilize poetry to enhance literacy. She started that in November 2019. We had her also on the All Access Cafe to thunderous applause, and it was just great. Her husband played instruments behind her, and it was wonderful. So please welcome to the online version of what we do these days, Semaj Brown. I'm unmuting you. You can unmute yourself. You should be out there. You go.
Hello, beautiful people.
Hello.
Oh, wonderful. This is fantastic. Thank you, ML, for inviting me. I had such a good time last time. My husband did too. It was just fabulous. And listening to all the poets. And I really enjoyed your reading as well. It was wonderful. I just wanted to say that my work in poetry and prose, as well as in theater and in science, health education, is really dedicated to documenting and witnessing destruction survival cycle. The destruction survival cycle, that came to me this morning when I was preparing. And I thought, that's what it is. It's been going on for the last almost 500 years, about 450 years. It's the onset of capitalism in a new and vicious, brutal way through the transatlantic slave trade. And so I've been witness to the results. We're seeing it today, the continuation of this type of brutality that's been happening to African Americans and to allies of African Americans as we try to undo these systems. So this type of structural racism and classism, it started with race. That was an invention that was created to create and keep power and resources. We all know this. So it divided humans from humans, and also humans from everything. And so people often ask me, they say, Semaj, I really like the way you use trees in your work, how you talk about trees, how you talk about the ocean, and how you talk about nature. And that's an assumption that they're making, that I'm not a tree, and that I'm not the ocean, and that I am not nature. And by inference, they aren't nature either. So With that, I think I will begin with the poem Black Dandelion. Age 4, witnessed my first mold out. Twinkling ground stars cut by murderous lawnmower. Feeling the blade, I fell, curled like a snail in grief. 12 full moons folded into spring, perennial promises prevailed. Bees, oh the bees, they celebrated return of the dandelions in a skirt of twinkling yellow bliss. Flowering bouffants mirrored my spiky little afro. Jagged-edged lion's tooth leaves paid tribute to my snaggletooth smile. Me and my freedom-fighting flowers frolicked to survive the scissoring, the up-digging, the poisoning. Warning signs hovered like low-hanging clouds. No blooming allowed. Blossoms will be prosecuted. These brave plants, they grew just for me, grew in spite of a society that favored a monochromatic landscape. 1965. Mr. Brother Malcolm X was assassinated. Big word for a pre-kindergartner. I was convinced he must have been a dandelion. Reverend King, too, and the Johnson boy, who lived one turn down the street that way. The Johnson boy was shot by the police for growing in a monochromatic landscape. Training wheels off, bike riding across insecure cement. I pedaled the bumpy path, waving solidarity to each surviving sunburst noggin, each fulfilling the promise to ornament lawn and flourish souls with lemon drop hope. Dandelion bear art of endurance and escape, transforming into pearl puffs, floating with ephemeral intention, carrying the spirit of the weed. 13 moons faded into July. I am a proud weed. Yes, I declared that shocking proclamation, standing in the pulpit on Youth Sunday, AME Vernon Chapel Church. I added to my speech on David and Goliath my impromptu improvisation of dandelion dogma. We are black dandelions who will never be destroyed. We grow the power of goodness for generations into the future. I yet remember the hat-framed faces of the pious, amused and mortified. So I thank you. Thank you much. I recognize the struggle of the earth to be my struggle. I am the earth. The coral reefs cannot breathe, and I cannot breathe. Do you see? Do you see? This next poem speaks to the destruction survival cycle I spoke of earlier from a plant perspective, It's called The After Death of Birth. It was inspired by a painting by my husband, James Brown, MD, who's an artist, a visual artist in the outsider movement. He also makes instruments out of tree limbs called arbor looms. And I don't know if you can see the painting or not. I'm going to move to the side. It's directly behind me and it's vertical. I don't know if there's a close-up enough of it, but it's abstracted floral. And there are lots of different colors of oranges and gold and green. Quite beautiful. And so I'm going to look into my book. I can show you my book right before I look into it, okay? This is called Bleeding Fire, Tap the Eternal Spring of Regenerative Light. And so I'm going to be reading The After Death of Birth. And it's Requiem for a Greenless Forest. To be the long-stemmed after death of birth, perennial justice of roots rising, merciful heroine of seeded kernels, propagator of unhatched blooms, to be the terminal gavel of passion, of nature, is to suffer passion, suffer nature, to suffer the perfection of grieving foliage is to hear constipated mulch of styrofoam polymers, is to suffer the echo, hear the eulogy of rainforest choirs, burn homilies, rupturing throats of declining lilies, sorrow sighs of sagebrush, hear the splitting girth of cactus seep acidic rain onto dying species, hear trees sizzle shadows from the poach of extinguishing foresters, hear earth malignantly distort into inoperative oxygen. I tell you, theirs is no ordinary passion. Green quest of survival, famously impaled as chlorophyll crucifix, rose petaled into industry exploitation's verdant blood. No, theirs is no ordinary passion. To perish seasonally, then resurrect in an ocean valley of extinction. To loiter beneath the solar stream of a depreciating planet. To expire in the threshold of reincarnations. To usher the descent and to rally the return, to hail the sapling rebirth. There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much. And so I did mention that my husband, one day, the funny story to me, I heard these sounds. They were very ethereal. They sounded like a cello. They sounded like an animal. They sounded like different things. And they were coming from my home in my basement. So I kind of creeped down into the basement, and there I saw all these tree limbs. We live in a semi-wooded area. All these tree limbs, and they were strung, and they were all different sizes. And my husband, he was down there just getting down. He was just playing it. So he had created all these different instruments called arbor looms. And in that moment, I thought about the over 4,000 lynchings of African Americans because I thought of trees. And I thought about our particular, very peculiar relationship to trees. Well, as humans, they give us oxygen, we breathe out CO2, right? Carbon dioxide, to take it in. We have this wonderful relationship. But then I thought about Black people here in America and trees. And that isn't what they were for. And I recognized them as sentient beings. And just recently, I was listening to NPR, some biologists and scientists, naturalists have proof now that trees live in communities and that they help each other survive through their systems, their systems that they have. And that whenever I used to see a tree just all alone by itself, I used to think of elephants. Just, elephants are in families. Trees are in families as well. And so I looked at this beautiful music and it's made of tree limbs, and I said, and I wrote the poem Freedom Tree that I'm going to read, and it became a song. And some of you know Jara McKinney or Michelle McKinney from the famous McKinney family. She sang this in one of the productions, our Bleeding Fire production at Charles Wright African American Museum. And boy, she just did it such justice. She's such a wonderful songstress. But I'm going to read it. And so it's called Freedom Tree Song. This tree is free. This tree is free. Free from hanging tombs and nooses as costumes. It walks and talks as witness of time, that time can't forget this. This tree is life. It skinned the bark of strife, extends its hands as leaves to untangle the knots we breathe. This tree is friend. As air, it does command, so we may breathe, breathe, breathe. Breathe beyond the blows of history. Breathe into the wind of destiny. Breathe the fire from our eyes. Breathe breath into the child that dies. This tree is free. We grow perennial souls. We grow clouds as rain. We are sun-drying pain. My arms as branches, my heart expansive in the hearth of this earth. This tree is free. Making music, harmony. Thank you. So I'm going to read an excerpt. Thank you so much. I'm going to read an excerpt because I know people have started wanting me to read this poem called Mother Ocean every time I read, because they have told me it helps to heal them. And so I'm going to read a little excerpt of it. It's a long poem. It's called Mother Ocean. It talks, it's a character, a spiritual character that talks about when she first received her daughters through the transatlantic slave trade, when they went into the ocean, either thrown overboard or having jumped overboard from the brutality. And so I'm going to, Mother Ocean is speaking. I'm going to just read a little bit of that before I go on to something else. But because we're having, let's see, such a difficult time, the African American community, with 80% of persons being in ICU that have COVID. Of course, Native Americans are having a hard time, and Latinos as well, because of long-term health disparities. So now it's the reckoning has come. The reckoning of all of this years and years of abuse. So this takes place when Mother Ocean, she receives her daughters, and this is what she's saying she has done, she did. She said, I fashioned each death anew, molded feminine fluid into flesh, pooling ancient memories, floating in time. They were recreated from the scarring flow of centuries, formed by amniotic river that pulse their veins. They speak the language of water now, and water is spirit, and spirit remembers. I am the ocean spirit remembering when they cannot. Water is spirit, and spirit remember. I am the ocean spirit remembering when they cannot. My daughters came to me, Mother Ocean, as cargo in chains on death vessels that heaved frothy blood in the crest of my waves. My daughters came to me, Mother Ocean, shredding skin, decomposing wounds, fodder for sea monsters, and new world rapists. Millions, 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 and billions collapsed into the inconceivable lap of violating current, descended to maritime grave, asphyxiated by the horror of what was yet to be suffered. But on my ocean floor, I rock them in the crucible of seaweed and succor, coddle them in the ebb of coral incantations, wash them with those two aquatic lovers, hydrogen and oxygen. I cleaned and christened, I purified, and I baptized their white bone skeletons into briny blessed assurance. And as ocean, I followed that tide of dripping gore across myself to the shore of servitude. I never left my daughters. I persisted in all my forms. Sometimes water vapor, whispering, dignity. Sometimes hailstorm, summoning strength of Ella Baker ancestors. I thought I'd just do an excerpt of that. It's a very long poem. And the last poem I'm going to do is called When Fools Talk to Me. I'm going to, yes. So I've written about this whole idea of microaggressions. And I've said, well, they're not micro at all, but I put it into a poem. It's called When Fools Talk to Me. Considering the present climate, I find myself adjusting spectacles a great deal as I encounter the latest absurdity du jour in a wave of microaggressions. The idea of the word microaggression is actually a double upside down insult, as there is nothing minor or micro about these aggressive assaults. One never knows when or why the next eyeglass adjustment will be necessary. Lunacy. And now I can say, and fascism seems to be mounting by the minute. So when fools talk to me, adjusting my glasses affords me the extra 2 seconds necessary to assess, think, compartmentalize, remain silent, or speak clearly, or be kind and compassionate, or breathe and breathe again, or run the entire U.S. history through my mind, flip cards bending and falling, or offer tutorials on systemic oppression, on systemic everything, or make a date to do lunch in between broadcast murders of unarmed Black men, or laugh madly at the absurdity just uttered to my face, or cry fire through my eyes, or consider becoming a recluse, or stab a coin in its heart, or jump wildly in thick air, push off the diving board of ignorance into another dimension. When fools talk to me, those 2 seconds of eyeglass adjustments give me the stillness required to pray, call on ancestors, talk to them about Sister Sandra Bland. Remember my training: light candles, expose illusions of power, make an incision, a topographical deconstructionist cross-section slit around the throat of fake democracy. You know, do a lobotomy on false scripture, carbon date the madness, know the lie, pardon the brainwashed messenger bearing toxins, for they know not what they say or do. Disengage, rally the angels, take cover. Kaboom, false evidence appearing real because they know exactly what they do. Liquefy in ultraviolet brilliance, transform into the sun, a glowing cauldron, winged woman floating on an electric carpet above it all. When fools talk to me, those 2 seconds are perspective information, certainty lining up on Mercury, Saturn, satellites transmit gamma rays, energy to my private electromagnetic field as I sit in the neon sky on an infrared chariot in my corner office. As I walk down the street past a cave of buried choke-holding policy, and I slingshot, boomerang, slingshot, boomerang, slingshot, boomerang. 1 million microaggressions from my orbit, repelled like projectile vomiting over the indigenous rainbow, like a sports foul out of bounds that snags on edges of jagged clouds. And Ray Charles sings, "Hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more. Hit the road, Jack. And don't you, and don't you, never, don't you. The axis of our planet straightens. Untruths and pollute, untruths that pollute bow down and disintegrate into the debris of a sneeze. Achoo! The atmosphere is activated. The moon, my ride and die, pulls water strings up. The sea high fives in wave gesture as hate evaporates. Gravity genuflects. There is a hierarchical reset. There is a hierarchical reset. There is a hierarchical reset. Nature is taking over. Me and Swag, oh, we dance around the shrinking fool. The fool sitting across from me, shrinking like reverse osmosis, shrinking like a warp in a TV advertisement. He is 1 foot tall now. The insulting, non-relevant, inconsequential fool, full of supposed unintended assaults. The microaggression maker to all things decent and good is the size of a dog biscuit now. 1/2 inch, 2 millimeters. Now I lower my eyeglasses and peer at this tiny, corrupted, ill-guided soul who once wore the smirk of privilege. I watch it rewind its birth until it disappears, vanishes, gone. All I need are 2 seconds. 2 seconds to adjust these spectacles, you see? When they talk to me, what? Magical things happen, like cosmic power things happen. But I need at least 2 seconds and some very large eyeglasses. Thank you.
Semaj Brown.
Thank you so
Wow.
much. Wonderful being here. Thank you.
Yeah, great performance. I loved it. Loved it. Thank you, Semaj. And her book, her newest book is, or one, I think you have 2, but one was on Broadside Press, one of the new ones.
Yeah, this one is Broadside and Health Collectors, and it's called Bleeding Fire, Tap the Eternal Spring of Regenerative Light.
So that's Broadside Press, and I'm sure Broadside Press books are at BookBeat. So I know they have key.
It's not at BookBeat. You can get this book on Amazon.
Well, there, but I think they may, because it's Broadside, they may actually have some at that particular store.
I know.
All right, good deal,
You
man.
can get it at Amazon.
Yeah, it's out there and it's worth looking into. It's quite good. Thank you, Semaj.
Thank you so much.
The next reader, one thing I did want to mention as I was doing this is, on occasion you see me have a drink of iced tea, and someone suggested I had a bottle of Jack Daniels, and I should be on Jack Daniels during the Trump administration, but anyway. I just want to give you a little information. Lisa Lenzo is a fiction writer. This is her second collection with the Broadside Press. I'm saying Broadside, with the Wayne State University Press and the Made in Michigan series. She's won awards for her work, and I'll give you just a little bit of background on her. The author of 3 award-winning short story collections, Within the Lighted City, chosen for the 1997 John Simmons Short Fiction Award. You know, actually, I think, Lisa, that's kind of how and when we met. Am I right? Because I have a hardcover copy of that from you. Was published by the University of Iowa Press. Strange Love, a novel and short stories by Wayne State, recipient of the 2015 Michigan Notable Award, as well as a finalist for 3 national awards. Unblinking, also from Wayne State just this year. Tough to release a book in 2020, but it already is a 2020 Midwest Book Award winner for the short story collection anthology, as well as a finalist for the 2020 Next Generation Indie Award. So please welcome to the living room, Lisa Lenzo.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Lisa.
Thanks for coming today, all. Semaj, that was wonderful, incredible. And Keith, I love your poems as well. Very nice. Glad to be reading with you today. And I also want to thank ML for inviting me here and hosting this whole series, and the Detroit Writers Guild, Book Beat, and Poets and Writers. And thanks everybody else for coming too. I see cousins and brothers and stepsons and husband and friends. It's really nice. So from California to New York City. I'm going to read a few. Only thing I don't see my mom. I guess she wasn't able to get on, but oh well. I'm going to read a few short excerpts of stories from my newest collection, Unblinking. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about them. This is the book right here. I'll start with a scene from a story called Up in the Air. The main character is a young blues musician who became a paraplegic when he fell from a tree. Here he is describing the fall that led to that injury. What happened was this. I'd smoked some weed with my brother and two of his friends and two girls on the drive out to Kent Lake. When we got there, they lit another bowl and I started up the scarred knobs of a tall pine. Mason, you monkey, bring your butt back down here, my brother called. He probably thought I was too high to climb. No crazy stuff this time, he shouted up after me. I didn't look down at him or answer. At first I climbed carelessly, without a plan, simply enjoying the feel of moving upward. But soon heaviness slid into my arms and legs, and though I wasn't cold, I began to shake. The truth is, I'm afraid of heights. My hands closed around branches as if trying to fuse with them. I felt my sweat growing cool, though the day was mild and there was hardly any breeze. I continued to climb, trying to ignore what was happening to me. But finally, as I always did, I stopped and just stood there gripping the tree, feeling the rough bark against the skin of my palms. This is silly, I said to myself. I'm scared. What am I trying to prove? But then I told myself, go on, just a little higher. And I kept going up, hand over hand, foot after foot, until soon my thoughts had drifted and both my high and my fear had left me, as I'd known they would. I was wearing an old sweatsuit and my red low tops, perfect climbing clothes, perfect clothes for jumping. Feeling light and keen and extremely alive, I climbed higher with incredible confidence, but also with incredible care. I was a long way from the ground. When the trunk thinned so that I could span it with my hands, I stopped and looked down at my brother and his friends and the girls. They looked very far away. I could see they'd stopped passing the pipe. They were all watching me, faces lifted and motionless. I looked across to the nearest tree, another pine. It had very few lower branches, so its higher branches were easy to see from the ground. I'd jumped to that tree before. That day, I chose a different branch. I looked at it for a long time, studying its angle, its roundness and thickness, its flaky, brownish gray bark. And then I leapt. It feels like this. First a singing, close to screaming joy and fear in my throat and gut and every bit of my body. An indescribable moment of touching nothing. Then the relief of feeling rough bark grip by my hands, solid wood underneath. Only this time the wood wasn't solid, and the branch I grasped held at first, but then snapped cleanly with my weight. And as my feet continued their upward swing, I dove downward, head first. I watched tree limbs passing me as if they were falling, and I was holding still. And then the branches seemed to slow, and I did too, almost to a stop it seemed. I floated downward, trees upside down all around me. Something punched my shoulder, hard, a branch, but it didn't hurt. A wonderful, dreamy spinning turned slowly in my chest and throat and head. I felt more awake and alive than I'd ever felt. I wasn't afraid. I couldn't stop what was happening, and I didn't want to. My new story collection focuses mainly on Detroit, my home city. And in focusing on Detroit, certain subjects are unavoidable. For instance, race. Cultural appropriation has been much discussed and debated of late, and readers and interviewers have asked me about this in general and in regard to my own writing. I answer this way. I write from my personal experience. I make fiction from my life and the lives of people I know or have known. And race is not a topic I've gone out of my way to select, but an integral part of my formative years. In a similar vein, because I have a lot of disabled people in my family, disability is an innate part of my personal experience, my lived life. I try to write about race and disability respectfully, as well as honestly, and to make a worthy contribution to the conversation. Here's a scene from my story called In the White Man's House. It's told from the point of view of a middle-aged Black man whose father could pass for white and did. This father left his Black family and vanished into the white world. Here's the Black son, now a man, looking back at his youth. That night, I couldn't sleep because I kept thinking of my father. My mother had tracked him down a year ago. She took me along with her, somewhere north of 8 Mile, where the houses sat far back from the street and the lawns looked soft enough to sleep on. We walked up the stone steps of a big house in this rich neighborhood. My mom rang the bell, a fancy chime, not a ring or a buzz. And a white woman with a brown mole on her chin answered the door. My mom asked to speak to Josh Logan, and my dad came up behind the white woman and said, "I'll take care of this, Lois." He stepped out onto the front porch, closing the door firmly behind him. I think my mom and I were the only ones in that whole suburb who knew he wasn't a white man. He gave my mom all the money in his wallet, a bunch of 20s and some ones, and said he would send her a check soon. He told her not to come there again, but to call him on the phone next time she needed anything. I was 11 years old then and tall enough to look him in the eye. But he only glanced at me once and then looked away without smiling. His dark hair was straight, what Black people used to call good hair, and his eyes were large and hazel and shining with fear. Despite my brown skin and nappy hair, I looked a lot like him. Same thin lips and broad cheeks, same big gold-flecked eyes that showed what I was feeling. I hadn't seen my dad since before Christmas, when he left for work one day and just never came home. I wanted to sidle up close to his chest, feel his big hand come to rest on my shoulder. But he stepped backwards into the house and shut the heavy front door. My mom went alone another time to see him, but he was gone. A real white man and his family were living in that big house. Since then, I've had dreams of walking into a freak tent and seeing my father under the lights, a tall, handsome man who can shift in an instant from Black into white. Sometimes my little sister is standing beside him, her nappy blonde hair flowing over her shoulders, her light gray blue eyes as soft as the sky. While some people have questioned my authority to write about race from the point of view of a Black man, no one has questioned my authority to write from the point of view of God, which I do in one of my stories. And not God as most people view him, but God who is a hermaphrodite, God who prefers atheists to believers, who likes to come down to earth to play basketball on Detroit streets, God whose name is spelled with a small g. I recently finished reading a novel by Caitlin Horrocks called The Vexations. One of the characters in it talks about how we take big things like Detroit or dying or race or God, and make them small and about ourselves. Always, she says, I come back to myself. For a long time, she thought this made her small-minded and womanly, that men were larger thinkers because they could hold larger ideas in their heads, hold them in a pure way, without the contamination of petty or private concerns. She expressed this in a letter to her brother, who later became a famous composer. He wrote back, "But we're all trying to make something small. It wouldn't fit into people's ears otherwise. Take a look in the mirror, just a tiny dark space, full of earwax to boot. You can hardly expect to jam something enormous inside it. The only way to get inside is by making things small. Here is a scene from my story called Marching, about a large moment in our country's history, which I've tried to make small enough to fit into our individual ears and hearts. And even though I still don't see my mom, I'd like to dedicate this excerpt to my mother and in memory of my father. That night, after our early dinner, our dad is watching TV in the darkened living room when my brother Arthur starts asking him about the Selma to Montgomery March, which has been in the news lately because its 50th anniversary is approaching. I stopped beside my dad's wheelchair to listen. I was 8 at the time of that march, and I'd remembered our dad being gone just a few days. But now he tells us that the march lasted for 5. 5 days, I exclaim. Did you march for 5 days? He nods. And it rained, Dad, didn't it? Arthur asks. I was reading about it on the internet, and it said that it rained several times along the route. Yes, that's true, our dad says. Did you have raincoats, I ask. No. Umbrellas? No. So what did you do, Arthur asks. We got wet, our dad says. It was refreshing, actually. We didn't have any place to shower along the way, and we hadn't brought any extra clothing. Arthur and I exchange looks, and Arthur massages Dad's shoulders and says, 5 days? I can't imagine you skipping a shower for even 1 day, old man, fastidious as you are. Didn't you stay at people's houses, I ask? Couldn't you use their showers? We slept in houses that first night, but then we slept in fields, in tents. There were too many of us. We were passing through small towns, some of them nothing more than hamlets. Our dad continues to speak, and we continue to listen. The police in Selma were extremely vicious, as they were in a lot of places. And ordinarily, a police presence of any kind would make me nervous. But right before the march started, Lyndon Johnson ordered federal troops to protect us. And every time I heard a helicopter or saw one pass overhead, I was relieved. There were helicopters flying overhead? Oh yes, constantly. Our dad tells us that the helicopters, as well as guards on the ground, some on foot and some driving jeeps, followed the whole march. Yet in every town they marched through, there were counter-demonstrators shouting from the sidelines. I couldn't believe how contorted their faces were, Dad says, completely distorted by hatred. In many towns, Dad tells us, there were Black people who joined the march for a few miles, then returned to their towns. In the first hamlets the marchers passed through, the people only stared, looking wary. In towns further along the route, they waved, and later on they joined in, walking along with the marchers. I'm sitting very still next to my father, awed by his place in the history of our country, surprised that I've never questioned him about it in detail before now. How did Mom feel about you going? Arthur asks. We talked about it, Dad says. And she agreed? Oh, sure, Dad says. I wouldn't have gone without her permission. We turn toward the recliner where Mom is sitting with her legs drawn up beside her. Mom, did you want him to go, Arthur asks, or did you just go along with it? Oh, I was for it, Mom says. I thought it was important. But all week long, I was worried and tense. I remember the first day, Sunday, on the way home from church, the car got a flat tire. All 5 of you were in the car with me, and I didn't know what to do. Zachary was only a baby. He just had his first birthday. Mike was the oldest, but he was only 11. So I drove to a gas station on the flat. I completely ruined the tire and the rim. And then I had a doctor appointment later that week, and the doctor said I had some little thing wrong with me, and I started crying. The doctor was surprised. He said, "This is nothing to cry about. It's not at all serious." But I was crying at the thought that I might have to deal with everything from then on alone, without your dad to help me. Dad looks across the room at Mom and says, "Your mother was braver than I was." I think this is true. My dad might have died in one terrible moment from a bullet shot by a racist, but my mom would have had to raise 5 children on her own and live the rest of her life without her husband. She would have had to be strong and resilient, month after month, year after year, until all her children were grown and beyond. We talked some more about the march, and I tell my dad that when I was little, I had a picture in my mind of him walking shoulder to shoulder with Dr. King. So a couple of years later, when I saw photos of the march in a book, I was surprised that you weren't right there beside him. No, he was at the front with the other notables, but I did walk right beside Pete Seeger for a while. You did? Did he sing? Yes, and we sang with him. What did you sing? My dad is quiet, remembering. One of the songs was We Shall Overcome. Someone would call out the next line, sometimes making it up on the spot. And I made up a line, and Pete Seeger picked it up. Do you remember what it was? My dad is quiet again. Then he clears his throat. We shall all have jobs, he sings in his hoarse voice. We shall all have jobs. We shall all have jobs someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe. Our dad finishes the refrain, then reverts to his speaking voice. We weren't marching just for voting rights, but also for jobs, better housing, decent schools. Blacks wanted the right to vote so they could help to change things. As I sit beside my dad, I think of how things have changed, for better and for worse. Dr. King would be proud and glad that blacks and whites together elected Obama twice, but he would cry and cry out at all that remains wrong in Alabama and in Detroit and across the rest of our country. Thank you. I'd like to close with a really short excerpt. These are the last lines from Unblinking, the title story of my collection. Here are the same elderly couple from the previous scene, Ralph and Rosie. They have left their apartment in downtown Detroit late one afternoon to buy adult diapers for Ralph. But they run into complications, and by the time they start returning home, it has grown dark. Ralph's wheelchair hits a bump in the sidewalk, and he slides out onto the ground. He's helped back into his chair by 4 black teenagers, one of whom is walking a dog. Afraid that Ralph might fall from his chair again, Rosie asks the 4 teenagers to walk with her and Ralph back to their building. Here they are, the teens and the old couple strolling together, with Rosie pushing Ralph in his wheelchair. Rosie smells the soap she used to shave Ralph this morning. She feels heat rising from the neck of his coat. All through the years, she has loved being near his warmth. She looks up at the darkened sky, hoping they will manage and even savor whatever time Ralph has left. And as she does, her gaze is caught by the moon, a bright sliver, thin as the edge of a fingernail, curving around a dark globe that's almost lost in the surrounding blackness. She leans in again toward Ralph. I don't know if you can see it, she says, but there's a crescent moon up ahead, above the buildings. Ralph shifts his head backward, and his large eyes turn upward. The teen walking the dog points with his free hand. It's right up there, he says. Ralph stares, unblinking, into the night sky. I can see it, he says. So delicate. Look how the clouds are moving across it, Rosie says. It's gorgeous, isn't it? Thank you. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa. The new book is, and both Made in Michigan books, they are available at BookBeat or other bookstores, I'm sure in Ann Arbor as well. I would mention to the audience and to the authors, when you go to my Facebook page, if you go to the video, because it will start replaying there, there's a lot of comments, a lot of good comments people have been listing about your work. So I just saw a number somewhere, there was like over 75 comments or 80 or something like that. So check that out. That will be on the link as well. So once again, thank you, Lisa Lenzo, Semaj Brown, and Keith Taylor. Good reading, and thanks, everyone. Another round. I think you can unmute yourself to, there. Unmute yourself and go crazy. With the gallery up, the gallery view up, so.
Thank you.
Hey,
I loved all the readings. It was wonderful stories, wonderful poems, Keith and Lisa.
it was nice. It was a really good quickly. And thanks to Robin Eichley, who will put titles, names in it and all that for us. And then we'll stream it on YouTube and on Facebook. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, ML. As always.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Support poetry and the Book Beat bookstore by purchasing books by Semaj Brown, Keith Taylor, and Lisa Lenzo. Orders can be placed by phone at 248-968-1190 or online. Curbside pickup is offered, and flat rate mailing is available anywhere in the U.S. for $3.